2, 1. And we are here. Welcome to the first edition of the P Political Podcast. Today's hosts are me, Eshan Pokhrel, and Michael Bodeker, with our guest, Ben Stevenson, who is a AP Government and AP US History teacher, I believe.
That is correct.
At Sparkman High School, and also one of the baseball coaches at Sparkman High School. Is there anything else I'm missing? You can go ahead and take the rest of your introduction.
No, yeah, I teach government, AP government. I've taught some pre-AP history, Sparkman. This will be my 9th year. Will be the most unconventional year yet, I think, but this will be my 9th year to start there. Coached baseball this will be 9 years, and coached football for a little while. And so, yeah, that's pretty much me.
Yeah, and if you guys don't know us, we are the co-founders of PB Political, and we will be alternating podcast hosts every week, so you won't see us on each podcast, but you will see the rest of our team every week. So that will be an interesting trip, and we'll be on YouTube and eventually Spotify. So once we have all the information for that, we will get it out to the masses on Twitter, YouTube, or Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And without further ado, let's start with our first question. Just to start it off, we are electoral politics, that's what we focus on here. So how do you think the 2020 election, let's start there, it promises to be the most hotly contested election, I'd say, in American history. Maybe the election of 1800 might trump it, but I think 2020 will be one of the more debated elections. President Trump's already said that he might not necessarily accept the results of the election, and I don't think Biden said anything on it, but I'm sure Biden will feel the same way if it's very close. So where do you think, despite who wins, how do you think it'll move the political landscape in the future?
I think we see it as contested as it is, in part just because how polarized we are. I think sometimes we forget that polarization is not new. You bring up the election of 1800. You could look at the election of 1824 with Jackson, Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, and the like. It's polarizing now for sure. Trump can say that he, may or may not accept the outcome. He's going to. He's going to be forced to. That's the nature of the political system that we have. Biden, whether or not he wanted to or not, he would be forced to. I think it's the nature of the political system that we have and the checks and balances that we have on government. Neither of them, I don't think, are going to be able to say, I ain't leaving. I don't think they'll have the authority to do that. It's definitely, though, I'll give you that. It's definitely polarizing. It's heated. I'll tell you this much. I think by a large majority, the Wednesday after Election Day, no matter the outcome, whether Trump wins a second term, whether Biden takes over, I think most people are going to get up and go to work and go about their regular lives. They're going to have, obviously, these smaller minorities that, may or may not, wail at the sky. There may be, screaming and gnashing of teeth by some. But I think by large majority, folks are going to get up and they're going to go to their job and they're going to keep doing what they've been doing. I think, in all honesty, and this is a great example of it, how we see this election play out, I think we put way too much stock in presidential elections as the end-all be-all. We say if Biden wins, this is going to happen. If Trump wins, this is going to happen. And our founders created a system of checks and balances to keep that from happening. In fairness, the way that it was created, our president doesn't have a great deal of power. Now, granted, he has more power now because the legislative branch has kicked that power off to him, just like they've kicked power off to the judicial, and they want the judicial branch to make policy for him now instead of just interpreting the law. But we put way too much stock in presidential elections. And oddly enough, we don't put as much stock in, legislative congressional elections, which really is where some stuff could get done if they would do it right. So I think the results are going to be what they are. I certainly, have an opinion on how I see those leaning right now. But I don't know that it's a wholesale change one way or the other. I think people will probably make a bigger deal out of it than it actually is.
I do want to ask, regarding the polling, we've seen Biden's up everywhere right now.
Sure.
Even up in Texas and places, it's crazy. But what do you think? How do you think that happened? Because Joe Biden isn't, frankly, the most mentally stable candidate, and he's also not the best candidate the Democrats had to run. They had Tulsi Gabbard, they had Andrew Yang, they had Michael Bennett. They had a lot of choices, and they chose Joe Biden. Do you think they knew their strategy going into like the primaries to kind of let Trump seemingly destroy himself, or what do you think was the strategy for them going in?
I don't think necessarily that was there. I think they've done a good job since. I think Biden has really laid low in all this. He hasn't come out. He hasn't been, the gaffe machine that everyone knows he can be, because he's kept quiet, which is a smart strategy by him. Make it a referendum on Trump, not a referendum on his misspoken, things that he'll go out and say. Candidate wise, I don't know. I think they were going for an angle of somebody who they felt like could be electable. Didn't know if Tulsi Gabbard, I think, would be electable. Especially some of the things she said at the end were more middle of the road. Now, granted, they wanted more of a moderate. They considered Biden more of a moderate than, say, Cory Booker or, obviously Bernie Sanders or any of those types. And that's why Pete Buttigieg did so well for so long, because he was viewed as a moderate, whether he was or not. So I think that was part of the strategy, is try to find someone that's electable. And yeah, kind of like you said, let Trump stumble over himself. Biden's up in every poll right now for the most part. What's interesting, though, I think is, there's a long time between now and November. Be curious to see how it goes. Yeah, I think if the election's tomorrow, I think Biden certainly wins. But you never know. And things can change at the drop of a hat. And there's a lot that can change between now and, I don't know. I didn't look back in 2016 what the polling numbers looked like, at the end of July. I dare say they were not in Trump's favor, though, at the end of July. And things shifted over time. So who knows? I like I said, as of right now, I would say Biden would win. But a lot can happen between now and November that completely shifts that all the way around.
Yeah, I'd say so. Do you trust polling after 2016? Do you guys feel like polling has been gamed, in a word?
I don't know. I feel like people often berate polls a little too much. They're qualified people, and there are a lot of good polls, but I feel like some people have taken 2016 a little bit too far and misanalyzed polling to a certain extent. I don't know. I think most of the polls are right. I think President Trump is losing fairly substantially at the moment, and that's why he's kind of changed his own course. He's taken a bit more of a moderate tone. He fired his campaign manager, and he's hired a new one, and he's changed his rhetoric, and he's trying to help himself win re-election because he knows he's losing.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, too, with polls, to say that they're just all out, we can't trust them. Look what happened in 2016. It's not necessarily true. There were polls out there in 2016, if you were to go and find them, that showed that there was a possibility that Trump win. Maybe not some of the mainstream polls. I think a lot of the things that people neglect to look at sometimes, they look at national polling. And it's not a national election. It is, but you've got to win states. You don't win the nation. We don't have a national popular vote. We have the Electoral College. So therefore, you've got to win the popular vote within each individual state, not the nation as a whole. So state polling is much more important to look at than, so-and-so's up X number of points nationally. Well, depends on who you're polling. Those could be from, blue states or red states or whatever it may be. I think it's also important to know that, number one, people can say things in poll, and a voting booth is a sacred and secret place. And I think there are a lot of people, for example, that happened in 2016 that knew Trump's rhetoric was out there, knew it was questionable, and so openly and publicly, they perhaps didn't support it. When asking a poll, they'd say, no, I'm unsure, I'm undecided, or I'll probably just vote for Hillary. And then when they got in the secret voting booth where no one can see what they do and they don't have to tell anybody how they voted a different way. And so because of that, polling can always be suspicious. It's not a perfect science. Most pollsters that are good know that, and I think that's something to keep in mind too.
Yeah, I'd say that's the secret. Trump's been hoping his secret majority comes through. He's been tweeting about it a lot. Hopefully it comes through. It did come through in 2016. But I feel like, I don't know. I feel like that silent majority thing is more of a problem for democracy than anything else, honestly. I don't know if you guys feel the same way because, I mean, expressing your opinions in a democracy is getting people canceled these days. It's doing a lot of harmful things to a lot of people that just have an opinion. So I don't know how I think Bodeker has a question on this, but I don't know. I don't see how we get through this, I guess. So,
Yeah, I agree. Did you guys see the Monmouth poll that suggested Trump could be down 2 or 3 points due to these secret Trump voters?
Yeah.
I think that poll is kind of a bit exacerbated in a sense. I think that there are probably some people that are secret Trump voters, but I don't know if it's the same number in 2016 that really pushed Trump over the edge. Because I think he has isolated a lot of people with his rhetoric and the things that he said over the past 4 years. So I don't know if that same number of people that won him Ohio and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin will be the same base for him in 2020. I think it could be a slightly different base.
Yeah, I think the base may change a little bit. And here's the other thing that I think is worth noting. 2016, there were plenty of people in 2016 that voted for Trump because they did not like Hillary Clinton. And that was the driving factor. Like, hey, Hillary Clinton scares me and I don't want to vote for her. And so that's where that silent majority, that secret majority, whatever you want to call it, came out and voted for Trump. They didn't talk about it because they didn't like his rhetoric, but man, they did not like Hillary. And I think that was one of the reasons, going back to your previous point, Eshan, that you said was, I don't think people are really scared of Biden. I don't think even Republicans are really scared of Biden. Whereas they thought when Hillary was running, man, she's radical. And we've got to go vote for Trump even because we can't have Hillary in there, man. She's out there. And I think even many people within the GOP now don't view Biden the same way. They don't view him as, boy, he is radical. And so he's not very scary. And I think that helps him in come voting, election day, is because people aren't going to be as geared up to go vote for Trump, I think, as they were in 2016 because of that.
I think that's a good point, but I also think there's a misconception about Biden being, like, I guess, a moderate now. Because if you look at his new policy plans he's rolled out, he's been working with Elizabeth Warren a lot. He's worked with Nancy Pelosi, who is really being influenced by the radical left wing of the party. So I feel like
Bernie Sanders, they collaborated too. Yeah,
Bernie Sanders. I mean, I understand it's good for voting. Like, it's good for him politically because, I mean, if he can bring that left wing of the party in that Hillary did not get in 2016, and Bernie's been helping him a lot. He's really stepped it up from 4 years ago when he just endorsed Hillary in July, and he got ahead of it earlier this year. But I think he's been influenced by them a lot, and I mean, I don't know. I feel like calling Biden as a moderate at this point is unfair. I mean, I see the reasoning, obviously.
I would agree with you. I certainly think he is not near as moderate as he's made out to be. But I think that's kind of, if you think about it, look at the average American voter. They're not very keen on policy. And that's the strategy is they can put more further left, more radical policy within Joe Biden's platform. And he's still seen as good old happy-go-lucky Uncle Joe. That's a nice guy. That's moderate. That's not going to be out there like a Warren or Sanders or whoever it may be. And then they can put that policy in there. And most people, most everyday average voters, again, are not informed enough to know where he stands on all the issues. They know like the broader Democratic platform. And they just kind of leave it at that. But you're right. I mean, to say that he's fully a moderate, if you look at his policy, I would say that's, it's further left than, it was the Democratic nominee's policy was, 10, 15 years ago.
You're exactly right. Like they are pushing Biden as a Warren G. Harding return to normalcy candidate. But I don't think Joe Biden is that. He's described himself as a transitional candidate. Like he wants to enact New Deal style programs. I mean, that's not a Warren G. Harding, everyone love each other, return to normalcy after Woodrow Wilson thing. That is a massive change to the country. And I don't think people have realized that as much as they should have.
Yeah, I think another problem is we don't really emphasize political education in this country, which is why half our elections are so, I don't want to say contested, they're so disruptive, I guess. Because, I mean, political education in general, I feel like, I don't know, I'm not a teacher, you're a teacher. So I feel like being part of school. I feel like there's a lot more the schools, like the government, could like put into our education plan that could help us more with issues like voting and political education. Like know what's at stake for each election. That's what we're trying to do at Pew Political. That's the whole reason we started it. But I feel like that's just not being emphasized enough for people to really know what's going on when they vote, and that's a problem that we really need to fix.
Yeah, I would agree with you to a certain extent. I think the other issue, though, and this is where it gets difficult, where you ask how do you fix it, is, I mean, political apathy just among voters is there. You guys are obviously passionate about politics. That's why you started this website and this podcast. I'm obviously very passionate about politics. It's what I do for a living. I teach it. But your everyday average Joe person is not necessarily passionate about it. And what they know about it, they learn from their favorite news commentary outlet, or Twitter, or the people that they follow on Twitter that are within their same, biases and that echo chamber that they live in. And so while there could be things done educationally to help push and let people have a broader understanding, I think part of it, you got to want to know too. And I think you have a lot of people that don't necessarily care to know. But yet sometimes they speak like they know, and they think that they know because of the sources in which they gather their information. But they don't care to look further or deeper or look at the facts. I saw an interview recently with Thomas Sewell, the economist Thomas Sewell, and he was saying, you can't know everything. You can't be knowledgeable about everything, but you can be knowledgeable to the extent of your own ignorance. And I don't think by a large majority, most people are knowledgeable to the extent of their own ignorance. They're not willing to say, I don't know that, and I would like to know, so let's look into it and let's figure out how I can know more. How does this affect if this person's elected, or if this changes, or if the House flips or the Senate flips, or politically, how does that affect the future going forward? Most people don't know, and I think it's a large majority. Most people don't care to know, because it changes the rhetoric if they do.
Yeah, I think it really just all comes down to the media, because I saw this thing, I forgot where I exactly saw it, but it was like, when you're sick, you shouldn't be eating processed food because it doesn't really help you get better, like highly processed soups and stuff. Same thing with information. If you get all your information off Twitter, you're just getting highly processed information, and you're not getting any real nutritious information that actually benefits you. And I don't think it's a passion thing. I think it's more like people don't understand why you need to be not involved necessarily, but be informed about politics. Because there's plenty of reasons that affect everybody for why you should be involved with voting or elections or anything like that. But people just aren't taught the reasons. They just get angry because they see something that's outrageous, and it really doesn't resonate with them, I guess. The broader idea. It's kind of rambling there at the end, but yeah, I don't know. It's just it's an education. I feel like it's an education problem. An interesting way to educate people is not applicable. Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're saying there. I mean, I would somewhat agree with that. I mean, it's just you have to care about certain things, and you have to want to, and at the same time, you've got to have educators in general that want you to know and want you to better educate. And this is the sad thing about it all, to be honest with you. I think we have educators, because I'm in numerous, obviously, teacher groups and Facebook groups and other things like that, and I've had conversations with friends of mine about this that agree with me. It's unfortunate, I think, that we have educators that are more so within high school and government classes that unfortunately look to push an agenda rather than just lay out politics and the facts and one thing or the other. They do it slanted. I mean, for example, I had, there were some people in a group soon after Trump got elected, and they were just like, I just don't know how I'm going to teach my government class today. And my thought, because they were hoping for that Clinton would have won the election. And my thought is, you're going to keep teaching government like you always have. It doesn't change the fact that somebody else's or somebody you don't like is in the Oval. Politics is still politics. They say, well, it's hard to teach about President Trump because of his rhetoric, and we've got to point out all this other. You don't really. You can point out politics, talk about how the branches of government work, how they operate, how decisions affect other decisions. Instead of in education, they try to make it a partisan thing because that's what, gets the clicks. That's what gets the likes. That's what gets people's attention is we're going to talk partisan. We're going to bash him or we're going to praise him or we're going to not debate, but argue instead of just laying out like, hey, this is how the government works. This is what happens if this happens. These are the causes and effects of certain things. So now I know, hey, let's stop worrying so much about the man in the Oval Office, for example, and let's figure out where my policy stances are, who mimics that the best, and then what levers to pull to make that go forward. I don't know. That's just kind of my thoughts on it.
This actually segues really well into this other question. I know I've been talking a lot. I'm sorry, Bodeker, but I do want to ask him this. Since you are a history or government teacher, with everything going on with like COVID going on, with the resurrected Black Lives Matter movements going on around the nation, do you think you will, even subconsciously, do you think it'll teach your rhetoric in the class? Do you think it'll change a little bit because of everything that has happened in the past couple of months? Not politically, just socially.
Sure.
Do you think it'll
Sure.
change?
I don't think so. I mean, obviously, subconsciously, I would. Consciously, I don't think it will. Whether or not it does subconsciously, I mean, I don't think it will. I think with the COVID situation, the resurrected kind of, I guess you could call it that, Black Lives Matter movement, they provide great examples for certain things, whether you want to talk about federalism, and the abilities for states to control their own government and the power of the national government and the long arm of the, I mean, you could use great examples for both of those things, whether it be COVID or the Black Lives Matter, the riots, the protests, all of that stuff lumped into one, where you could talk about federalism, you could talk about other things. Obviously, from a history perspective, I mean, you want to talk about COVID. We've had, things like this in the past, perhaps not on this scale, especially not in our lifetime, but you could take it back to the early 1920s with the Spanish flu, similar. And Black Lives Matter, I mean, you can tie that back to civil rights, 1960s and other things like that, some of these protests. So, I mean, I think there's a connection there that you could use, and it just makes it more relevant. I don't know that necessarily it would change my rhetoric or the way that I talk about things per se. I don't think so.
All right, I'll let Bodeker talk a little bit.
Well, I have a question for you, Steve-O. This one's kind of more of a personal question just for you, because we've talked about your teaching. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Would you consider running for a political office somewhere? Mayor of Harvest?
Oh, yeah. Mayor of Harvest. That's a good joke that we've had in class there. I've actually thought about this before. I'm not going to say that I've completely thrown out the idea of it. There's part of me that is politically active enough that would think it would be nice to run for, some sort of state office. Certainly not on the national level. I don't think I have the clout nor the fundraising ability to run on the national level in any way, shape, or form. It takes a lot of money to do that. And I don't think I have that ability. Possibly at the state level at some point in time. I wouldn't rule it out. I'll tell you this much. The thing that gives me the most pause about it is, in order to do that, I have to stop doing what I'm doing. I'd have to stop teaching. And I like teaching. And there are times when I think I could have a greater impact in the classroom than I could in Montgomery, for example. I think I could have a better impact to teach our young people about government and how it works, about politics, about trying to, which is what I try to do, try to bridge the gap of the left and the right a little bit and try to create intellectual debates and discussions, not just debates, which turn into arguments, but intellectual debates, viewing things from different sides, trying to form a good argument around the things that you believe, whatever that is. And I try not to push, any particular belief in my class. I'm sure I'm not 100% perfect with that every time, but that's what I try to do. And so sometimes I think I could have a bigger impact in that role than I could, trying to create policy. Do I have ideas and do I have policies that I would like to see come to fruition? Yeah, certainly I do. I've talked with a friend of mine recently a lot about it, actually. But, who's to say that I could get in the state house or, the state senate and actually make those things happen? That's the thing about the legislator is you can't necessarily do those things by yourself. So I don't know. I wouldn't say I'd rule it out 100%. 10 years from now, man, I'll be 19, 20 years in education. It's certainly possible, but I also may just do what I do forever. So who knows?
So maybe that's kind of a post-education kind of thing. Maybe not 10 years, maybe not 20, but 25.
It's possible. I mean, 25 years in, I can retire after 25 years. I'll be 48 years old when I can retire. So, I mean, I'll still be relatively young if I wanted to retire at that time from teaching. So maybe if that time came and the right thing presented itself, I would step in and do that. Maybe, I mean, like I said, I wouldn't rule it out before then. If it would just have to be a really good opportunity and a chance where I think I could put some resources behind it and do some good. And, I would talk to some people within my inner circle in regards to that and feel like it was the right thing to do for sure before I stepped away from education.
That's a really good segue into my next question. So as an educator, you observe what goes on in our schools, obviously, and the problems that they face. So what do you think needs to be done to fix our country's kind of educational woes?
Man, this is a can of worms you're opening here for me. I'm going to be honest with you. I have a lot of thoughts about education in general. The most common moniker to put with it is, to fix it, we got to spend more money. I would disagree. I don't think all of our problems that are, and education is one of them, can be solved by throwing money at it. And I know I would maybe get some scorn from some of my colleagues for those thoughts. Alabama spends roughly $9,500 per pupil. I think there are about 10 or so states that spend less than Alabama does. And obviously that's the main state that I can speak of because that's the one I work in. But I don't think there's so much a lack of money in education. I think money is spent in all the wrong ways by a large majority in education. There are things that are done and money that you see spent that, and again, this is just my opinion, but I feel like it's a waste of money. And money could be spent in other areas to where you don't necessarily need more money. You just need to spend the money you have better, is what it comes down to. Obviously, the big thing, and this is a talking point of the Democratic Party currently, is teacher pay. Again, this is going to draw some scorn from my colleagues. I don't think we get paid too little. That's just my opinion. I work 187 days a year. That's my contract. I work 187 days a year, and I get paid for those days. There are, I think, 260 something working days in a calendar year. I mean, I work 187 of them. I get 3 months where I can go on vacation. I don't take leave. Now, I don't necessarily get paid for those months, and that's a misconception too. Teachers don't get paid summer vacations. We get paid for 187 days, and they spread it out over 12 months, so we don't go 2 months without a paycheck. So we don't get paid for our time off per se in the summer. We get paid for the days we work, and they just spread it out. But still, I can, my wife's an educator too. We can go anywhere we want in the summer, and I don't take a sick day. I don't take a personal day. That's a perk of the job. I have great insurance. I have a lot of great benefits. I don't think we get paid too little. And I know that's not necessarily a popular opinion, especially coming from a teacher. And I'm not saying like when they passed, like they did a few years ago, a 4% raise, I was like, no, I don't want your money. I mean, obviously a raise is nice. Don't misunderstand me, but you wouldn't see me banging in the door down saying you need to pay teachers more if you want better education. I think too, teaching is a profession, kind of like policemen and firemen, to be honest with you, just to use them as an example, because they get paid, around the same ballpark, at least in this general area of the state. I think professions like that are service professions, pay should never be a draw, right? I should never want to go in to be a teacher because it pays well. I should never want to go in to be a policeman or a fireman because it pays well. I should want to go into those professions because it's what I want to do. And so Bernie Sanders, for example, had said he wants to make the minimum teacher pay $60,000 a year. Well, you're going to have people that go into education. They get summers off. They have breaks in between, and they make $60,000 a year. Well, people are going into that because it pays well and the benefits. And I think that would be a problem. Outside of money, pay, I think that we got to start putting education back in the hands of local school districts. Bodeker, you've heard me talk about this before. I'm not a big fan of the Department of Education. I know that's actually a stance of the Libertarian candidate, Jo Jorgensen. She wants to, dismantle the Department of Education. I can get behind that.
2020.
Yeah, I can get behind that. I can get behind that idea just because I think the federal government does not need to be involved. There's two big policies that have come out from the federal government in regards to education in my lifetime that I recall at least. One was George W. Bush's No Child Left Behind policy. And it's not a good policy. It's just not. There's no part about it that's really, really good policy. I'll be honest. And I joke, and I've told my students this when we talk about policies in general. And I mean this in the nicest way possible. Some students need to get left behind. We've created this idea that if you say that, you must not care about them and you must think, they're dumb but people learn at different paces. And to say that I'm going to take you and I'm going to force you to learn it at the same pace of everyone else, and then I'm going to slow it down for everyone else that could be sped up because we need to drag everyone along at the same, it hurts the overall population. It's okay if Johnny needs to take an extra year to be in 3rd grade or 5th grade or 10th grade so that he can get the material at his pace. Now, society will tell you, well, we just can't have anybody fail. Failure is a good thing sometimes. And it gets you where you need to be when you need to be there, instead of saying, hey, we're going to do this. So No Child Left Behind goes out and they make schools report cards based in part on graduation rate. Well, we can make sure everybody graduates if we want that good report card. But what kind of people are we putting into society after the fact? Probably not as good as if we really determined whether or not people knew the content. On the flip side of that, you had President Obama and Common Core. And again, that allows the national government to create a cookie cutter system for how we're going to teach different things. It's ludicrous to me that you would allow a federal government to go in and sit down and determine policy for the overall United States. It's almost silly to me that you would allow the state, we have a state board of education in the state of Alabama, that you would allow them to determine policy for the entire state. I think it should be left to the local school boards, for example, our local school board, to determine the track and the plan of how things are going to work. Here's a great example. Currently, the Alabama Department of Education, it's an elected position. Most of the people that run for those positions do it as a stepping stone to get somewhere else. One of the prerequisites, and this is just how crazy, and Alabama is not the only state that does this, views education. In order to run for the Alabama Board of Education, the State Board of Education, you cannot have been in education, teacher, administrator, any of those things for the last 5 years. So to be qualified, you can't have been in the field of education 5 years previously to running. That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, why you would do that. So for example, we have the Alabama State Board of Education that has said, hey, in order to graduate, you need to take Algebra 2 with trig, because that's going to get you ready for college. Right? But the fact of the matter is, we have other Algebra 2 classes, for example, like an Algebra 2 with finance. Well, that's what kids need to take to graduate. They learn how to balance a checkbook. They learn how to, about interest and loans and things that are actually, how many kids graduate and use trigonometry later in life? Some do, and some need to take those classes. I'm not discrediting the classes. But to say every student needs to graduate with trigonometry, you're going to have a percentage of your students that go straight into the military. They go straight into the workforce. They will never use trigonometry ever again. But everyone is going to balance a checkbook. Everyone is going to take out a loan at some point in time. They're going to have to create a budget for themselves to figure out how much. That's useful skills. But we have a Department of Education that says, no, we don't do that. Instead, you need to know trigonometry. Why is that the case? So again, when you have broad, and that's just one example, when you have broad groups, the state and especially the national government, that are making policy issues, I think your education is going to struggle overall. And so I think that's a big part of it. I think you've got to put the power back in the hands of the local systems to determine what is good for their students, because everyone's different. Even within the state of Alabama, systems are different. There's different clientele in Madison County and Mobile County and, Baldwin County, wherever you want to go, Jefferson County. Not all students are the same. And so I think those school systems need to be able to make some decisions for themselves and not follow a state policy from somebody who hasn't been in education for a minimum of 5 years, who was elected as a stepping stone to be elected somewhere else.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I don't think having a national system like Common Core or No Child Left Behind, it really hurts states like Alabama, like Mississippi, Louisiana, the relatively, compared to other northeastern states, poorer states in the union. And we see that because we have worse ACT averages. Standardized testing isn't the best measure, but we have I believe it's a 19 is our average score on the ACT in the state. We're one of the lowest. When you see like states like northeastern states, like Connecticut has a really high one. Vermont has a really high one. New Jersey, I believe, has the highest, and they have the highest graduation rates in the country, I believe, too. I feel like it's another national education system. Like it's just like another way to like kind of hurt a region. Like in the long run, it's just like another boot on people's throats or on their necks or anywhere. And we just need to get rid of. We need to get rid of the Department of Education. That's what we've learned.
Well, and I think a big part of it too is, I mean, and this goes with anything, competition breeds success. And so I think you've got to create an idea of some school choice in there in which students have the, and people say, well, you know, that's going to hurt your underperforming schools. But again, maybe they need to be hurt. If you can't meet up to snuff, then I don't want my kids to go there because that's the school they're zoned for. And maybe I don't have the money to pay for them to go to private school or charter school or whatever it may be. And I'm perfectly fine with charter schools being an added level of competition. I have no problem with that. Especially public charter schools that you don't necessarily pay to get into, but they're limited in the amount of people they can take in. So you pretty much got to, you know, win a lottery in terms of getting in those schools. But I mean, I think, yeah, my kids are zoned for this school and it's a terrible school, I should be able to take them somewhere else. Because again, enough kids start leaving the school and they're going to have to realize we've got to get our act together. We've got to change. We've got to be better. As long as they keep getting funneled money and kids keep having to come there and they have no choice in the matter, they can continue to be whatever they are. And they're going to keep functioning and they're going to keep opening their, you know what I'm saying? And so that's the problem too. You need to create some level of competition in which, you know, it allows you to push to be better.
Yeah. I don't think that, like your point, like combine, like measuring a school's success or like lack of success off a national system just doesn't seem like the best. Like having a school, because like every state has different challenges, every region has different challenges. So I don't think that, I'm not disagreeing with you. I don't think that like labeling a school as bad based off a national plan is a fair assessment to the school. That's my opinion. Just like feel as if you have to reform education in any way possible because we're lagging behind other advanced nations in the world and even some undeveloped nations. And also we need to find a way to regionalize, that's not a word, make success regional based off each region instead of broad spectrum. It doesn't work.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really unfair to compare Alabama to Connecticut or New Jersey because I think we're very different states. And to mention, Steve-O, about school choice, I have family that lives outside of Atlanta and they live in Forsyth County, and my cousin's going to be a freshman and she gets to choose whether to go to North Forsyth County High School or West Forsyth County based on her interest and her career path because they both got different things. And I thought that was, really cool because, she gets to choose where she wants to go to school based on her own individual needs. And I think that would be excellent if we had something like that instituted in Alabama.
Sure. Yeah, and again, I mean, I was looking it up there some while you guys were talking too, and you want to look at the state report card that we get. And so people put a lot of stock in that, like, oh, what did your school score in the state report card? Guys, to be honest with you, this is what the state report card is based off of. 30%, which is the highest percentage, is based on the graduation rate. So I'm literally incentivized to make sure that I have as many people walk across the stage as possible, whether or not they know the material. And I think that's a problem. In order to get a good score, I need people to graduate. Instead of saying I'm going to teach them and I'm not going to hold their hand necessarily and say, we're going to make sure you graduate. And I that sounds crass a little bit, but you have some students that don't want it. They don't have any desire. They don't have any drive. They don't have any motivator. And I don't think you should just socially promote them along. I think you make a worse off society. 25% after that is based off how well the growth between when a student took the pre-ACT in 10th grade to the ACT in 11th grade that they take at school. So 25% of your report card is based off of that. And so you think about the fact that, here's a great example. Let's say that one of you guys took the ACT on your own, early junior year, and you made a 35 or 36, because I know somebody that did this before. Well, the school in the state of Alabama, as juniors, everyone takes the ACT together. They're giving it for free. Well, I know a kid that made a 36 before that date, so he didn't come to school to take it. And if he did, he was just going to bubble stuff in because he's already got a 36. He doesn't care if he makes a 25 on the next one. He doesn't want to do it, but he's forced to. Well, now if he goes out and makes a 25, well, now the school looks like he's got a 25. We don't take his best score ever. We take his score he made on that day. That's just ludicrous to me. 20% is how well they do in math and reading on the ACT in 11th grade. And that's 20% how well you do in the math and the reading portion. Again, you're going to have some kids that go in there and just, they don't care about the ACT. You have a certain percentage of kids that know 100% I'm going in the military, or they know 100% I'm going to the workforce. They could care less about the ACT. And I can try to stress to them as a teacher that, hey, this is really good and it'll help our school, so do your best. They may not care. That's not the career path that they have planned for themselves. So we're tying in a state success, a school success rather, around how well kids do on the ACT and whether or not they graduate, pretty much, and then 10%. So we go all the way down to 10% is based on chronic absenteeism. What percentage of students miss 18 more days a year? Well, that needs to be up there higher because we need to incentivize kids to come to school. You learn more if you just show up and walk through the doors of the building. You'll learn more if you're in class every day. Even on the days that you sometimes think I'm out of it today and I'm not paying attention. The kids who learn the best in school are the ones that actually show up. I tell kids that go to college all the time because I teach seniors. Guys, you want the secret to success, to passing college and not failing out, is to go to class. That's literally all. If you go to class, you're going to be okay. Because if you wake up and go to class every day, then you care enough to make sure you get your work done and to study and to do the things you need to do. The friends that I had that failed out in college, they didn't go to class. And that eventually was their downfall. So we've got this flipped. We make 10% of it about chronic absenteeism, and the other 10% here is percentages are college and career ready, meaning they hit a benchmark on the ACT or they have enlisted for the military or whatever, which again, those speak to every student. The top 3 speak to your student for the most part that's trying to go to college. Well, not every student's going to college. So now we're basing a school success off their kids that are going to college. The highest percentages and the lowest percentages are for everyone else. And I just think that's a weird way to do it. Speaking
of college and that, like college in general, college it's very powerful right now, let's say the least. It's kind of like, it feels like it's been like forced on everybody. How do you think, and there's always the option of trade schools and vocational education. How do you think, and those, the thing people don't realize about this is that how well they pay for how little you have to pay, like how little you have to like go to school for. How do you think people, especially in Alabama, because we have a lot of opportunities in Madison County for things like that, at the Redstone Arsenal, everything like that. How do you think schools, especially in our area, can incentivize that better? Because it's really a good way to start a better life.
Yeah, you've got to really drive the point home that college is not the end all be all. And we have made a grave mistake when we have said that in order to be successful, you have to go to college. I know numerous people that had never went to college and they do just fine. They make, much more money than me. If that's how we want to equate success, and that's not necessarily how you should equate success either, it's based off the amount of money you make. I mean, I'm a high school teacher. I don't make a lot of money. I consider myself to be pretty successful. So, I mean, again, if that's the measure you're making, but if that's what you want to use, there's plenty of people that you can do to do it. And you have to have people within trade professions. If I have a situation where I need a plumber to come to my house, I'm not asking him where he got a degree or if he has one. I could care less. All I care about is whether or not he can do the job. If I need somebody to come, give me new countertops or lay flooring or paint my house, I could care less where they have a degree from. I want to know if they can physically do the job well. That's what we need to be reminding our students of, is that there's more to it than just, hey, you can be successful outside of going to college and getting a degree. And even within the idea of college, we've made this concept of you have to go to this college or that college in order to be successful, right? So you've got to go to, this bigger name or here. And again, not knocking on your high-level schools, Harvard, Yale's, the big ones, if you will. But to say that if you don't go to those, then you're not going to be successful is wrong. And that's silly. I was glad to see President Trump sign the other day where he talked about that you would be looking more at experience for job applications within the federal government rather than just a college degree. Because let's see what people can bring to the table instead of just looking on paper and saying, oh, they graduated from here, so they must be qualified. Because they very well could not be. And so I think you really have to push those type of things as well. And you have to remind students that, college is not the end all be all, for sure.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point, because when you encourage all of these people that, may not necessarily be supremely fit for college to go out, and if their parents don't have money, to take out hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans and this and that, you're leading to intergenerational struggle, because your parents have loans and they're not going to be able to pay for their kids' loans. It's because they went to college when they really should have gone to a trade school and learned a trade. And so that's leading to intergenerational struggle at the kind of the socioeconomic level.
They need to learn to code now. Can't learn to trade.
Well, see, and that's the thing too. I mean, you could spend a lot of time talking about student loan debt and the thing that goes. I mean, what people don't realize, the federal government is in the business of loaning money. And as long as the federal government is in the business of loaning money for education, then they have stake in the game for tuition to be too expensive. Because if tuition is too expensive, well, then I have to take out a loan from the federal government, and then I'm going to pay interest on that loan in which the federal government's going to make money. So the federal government has stake in the game. They need tuition to be too expensive because they need me to take a loan. It shouldn't be that way. Right now, if I want to go take a loan to buy a house or to buy a car or for whatever I want to do, I'm going to go to the bank and they're going to determine my risk for that loan, right? What type of money do I make? Can I pay the loan back? Well, we don't do that in education. They can say, hey, I want a loan for education. The federal government says, okay, here's all the money that you want. Well, I go and get a degree in something that does not pay out well. Well, I'm going to struggle to pay that loan back. Let's say that I said I want to be a teacher and I'm going to go get a degree in education from Harvard, for example. Why would I do that? I don't know. But let's just say I wanted to go big name. I want to go to, Georgetown or a high level school. And I still want to be a teacher, though. I just want to say I got a degree from this high prestigious university. Well, how much is it going to cost to go there compared to where, you go to a smaller state school? And I'm going to get paid the same to be a teacher regardless, no matter where I got my degree from. So now I've got to turn around off a teacher salary and try to pay off this huge loan. Whereas most people would look at that and they say, no, I'm not going to give you a loan that much because this is on average how much money you're going to be making and you're not going to be able to pay it off. But they want you to do that because they want you to pay student loans for 20 years of your life because they incur interest and you pay the federal government money. That's our problem. The only way to bring tuition down, in my opinion, and perhaps that's all this is in my opinion, is you got to get the federal government out of the loan business. They've got to stop giving student loans. I'm not saying student loans should not exist, but I'm saying they can't come from the federal government. There's got to be some risk reward there. I'm not going to give a loan to a teacher for, $50,000 because on average, a teacher's going to make less than that per year when they start out, and they're going to be paying that loan back forever. So, there's ways around it. There's ways to be smart about it, I think.
Yeah. I think, since when people move into the workforce, they're already submerged in loans and stuff. Since and humans aren't really, we have limitations physically. Sure. And COVID-19's shown that. How do you think the economy is going to move? Do you think the automations, since automation does take away a lot of less skilled labor jobs, and it is happening. It's self-driving trucks are coming. Factories are really machine oriented now. Do you think that curve will be exacerbated, and do you think it'll come quicker than it was going to? Do you think that wave will come sooner?
I think it's possible. I think you're going to have people that are within that industry that are going to try to say, hey, we need to get going now, because of things like this that can take place. I know there's a lot of people that fear automation, and I understand why. I don't at all want to say that I don't, because it certainly can take jobs away. At the same time, technology and automation are not necessarily new, and I think there's always something new that a person can do. You say, well, self-driving trucks will take the job of truck drivers everywhere. Something else is going to happen because we've seen it throughout time in which new jobs are made. And that is the good thing to a certain extent about the free market is you see things happen. Look at this Look at the COVID example. What type of industries have now been opened up because of this scenario alone? I saw a commercial the other day for a spray that you can put on your glasses so that when you wear them with your mask, your glasses won't fog up. I mean, that's a new invention. That's a new product, right? That no one ever would have invented had we not been in our situation where you're walking around wearing a mask. And so there's always something new. Society always provides something new. I think what is going to make, in all honesty, what's going to make automation and things happen at a faster rate is if you see things like an increased minimum wage, among other levels. I think that's going to cause automation to happen more so than the other, because if I have an unskilled worker or a lower skilled worker and I'm now forced to pay them a higher wage than what they perhaps the work they put out is worth, well, now I have greater reason to just dump that worker altogether and go to automation. The problem with minimum wage in general, even being, what, $7.25 or whatever it is that sometimes it hurts the lesser skilled worker overall. Because you have people, for example, right now that are looking for jobs in our current, social and political climate. They're looking for jobs, economic climate. They need money, and they don't have the skills to get a job at this particular level. They could get one at a lower level, but those jobs don't exist because you can't pay someone that. You've got to pay them X amount of dollars. You've got to pay them a minimum. That's the dangers that minimum wage does, is it keeps people who would take less money to have a job and to make money. It keeps them from being able to do that. And so I think actually it ends up hurting the less skilled worker. And I understand the argument for people, hey, we need to raise minimum wage because they make minimum wage and $15 sounds better than $7.25. I understand that, but the money's got to come from somewhere. Obviously, we're not just printing more of it. So there's got to be a give and take. And you got to understand, if I'm paying two people $7.25 and now I'm paying both of them $15, I'm probably going to have to let one of them go. So which one is going to get let go? Well, it's going to be the less skilled one. So now the person that really needs the money the most, right, because they can't just go find an easy another job because they have less skill, well, now they're let go. And so that's where I think automation could really hurt people more so, is as long as we have those wages set in place that keep me from working at a wage that I'm willing to work at, if you will. But the federal government pretty much says I can't work at that wage.
Yeah, I mean, I believe minimum wage. I think it was born out of the Great Depression, I believe, right? FDR created the first one, I believe, in the Green New, or not the Green New Deal, never the Green New Deal, the regular New Deal. So I mean, the minimum wage seems like a thing that was born out of necessity, and I mean, we had it it's been the same for a while. I think it was changed after 2008. Correct? 2009 maybe. I'm not sure exactly, but I think people just. Because you can't afford there's a study, I don't know, it was pretty recent. You can't afford a 2-bedroom apartment, I believe, and like a standard 2-bedroom apartment with working on minimum wage for let me look it up real quick. I think the main problem with it is that it doesn't help people. It helps people. It doesn't help people enough right now when inflation's somewhat going up. Everything's kind of expensive. People can't really live off of it, and they need something they can live off of it. But our economy is turning into a gig economy, so they don't have a stable income source, and they can't really survive. So that's why the minimum wage increase is very persistent throughout the country. I believe Alabama is going $15 an hour soon, right? I'm not sure if they passed that, but I believe.
I'm not sure. I haven't seen that myself.
Maybe not. I heard there was a bill working its way through. I don't know when it was, but they said they wanted to change it to 15. I believe my cousins live in Colorado. He works minimum wage at the PGA store, and he gets $12 an hour. Obviously, Colorado is more expensive because cost of living's higher and everything.
Well, and here's the thing with that. It's not that I'm opposed to. So somebody says, well, let's say Amazon wants to increase their minimum wage to $15 an hour. That's fine, because the company themselves has made that decision. The problem is when the federal government or even the state government puts that on you that says you will pay a minimum of this amount. Well, my business may not be able to handle that. So either my business goes under, or I've got to start firing people in order to only have the set amount of people, because my overhead is this amount and my profit is this amount. So I can only hire this many employees. If I have the ability and the capital to pay my people more, then yes, absolutely pay them more. But for the government to say you must pay them more, I think it gets people in trouble a little bit. A minimum wage was never meant to be obviously something that is long term. Now I know it's become that for some people. But again, I think in the long run, it does more damage than good, because it forces to where if you brought the minimum wage to $15 an hour, you're going to have more people working at minimum wage. If that makes it, you know what I'm saying?
That's true. Yeah.
So that's the problem.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I don't think there should be a federal minimum wage by any standards, because it all comes down to different states and different regions of the country. So, I mean, I don't think the federal government should be in a lot of things that it's in. But it is, and untangling that web seems like something that'll happen maybe in a while. It'll take a while, regardless when it happens.
Sure.
So I'm not too optimistic about anything like that, personally. Bodeker or anything? I don't know.
Yeah. So speaking of the country, Steve-O, when you look at the country in 2024, which is the next general, where do you see the country with a Biden victory in November, and then how would that America be different with a Trump victory in November?
Again, I think, kind of like I mentioned earlier, the big question mark is what Congress looks like. I think with a Biden victory in November, if the GOP retains control of the Senate, and the Democrats have control of the House, I mean, stuff is not necessarily going to get flown through. If Biden wins and the Dems take over control of the Senate and they have control of the House, obviously they're going to push more left policy than otherwise. I think overall, and this is where it gets interesting, and this is completely conjecture on my part, I think with a Trump victory in November, I think it's going to make it much more difficult for a Republican to win in 2024. Simply because I think the left will come out and say, we've had 8 years of Trump, and they're going to tie him directly to the GOP, whether or not he truly is a conservative or not. And they're going to say, no matter what, I don't care if it's Lucifer himself, we're going to vote Democrat, in 2024. That being said, I think if there's a Biden victory in November, I think it's going to be much more wide open in 2024 for Republicans. I think that they're going to have plenty of quality candidates in 2024. They're going to come on the scene during that time period that necessarily were not there in 2016. Obviously are not there now because they're not going to run against an incumbent president. It'll be curious to see. I'll be curious to see if Biden does win, if he runs for re-election in 2024. He obviously is getting older in age.
I think he ruled it out during his primary campaign. He was like,
I think that would be a smart tactic. If he was smart, he would pull the James K. Polk and say, "Hey, I'm going to go one term," which is why I think his vice president is important for him and for Democratic voters. I think who he chooses as vice president is a big deal. Now I think he's put himself in a bit of a box by saying that he will, back in the primary season, hey, I will have a female vice president. I think that limits you. I don't think anyone should ever say, I will have this or I will have that. I think you should go out and find the best candidate, period, especially when you're talking about someone who's a heartbeat away from the Oval Office. And so I think that's going to be a big question that people are waiting to see. Who will he choose? And it very well may turn people off Biden. It very well may turn people on to Biden. It very well may not change their opinion. I know he's put out his short list of people, I think, that he has to choose from. If it was me, if I was Joe Biden right now, I probably 100% choose Val Demings from Florida. I think she is an African-American woman. She is a former police officer. She is from a swing state. And she is not near well known as Warren, Klobuchar, Kamala Harris. So she can kind of write her own story, set her own path, and she doesn't necessarily have as many biases coming in as would Harris, Klobuchar, Warren. People already have preconceived notions about them. They don't necessarily, outside of Florida, have those about Val Demings. So I think that's the choice that makes the most sense for him, whether or not he goes that route. I don't know. He usually doesn't necessarily listen to me. So
I personally, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of he recently said that his vice president he's vetted 4 black women, I believe, but he hasn't said anything else. But I don't think he really has put himself in a box, because the consensus now is he's going to pick a black woman to be his VP, and many people think it's going to be Harris. Harris would not be a good pick in my opinion, especially with all the rioting and everything going on, and her contentious police record does not help.
Yeah, I think Harris would be a poor pick. I've heard other names. Stacey Abrams, I think that would be a very terrible pick for him. They floated out Mayor Bottoms out of Atlanta just recently. Of course, she's been in the news with some of the riots and protests in Atlanta. I'm not saying that she would be a bad pick. I don't know as much about her. Obviously, she's not in national politics. Not that that's a prerequisite by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a big jump from mayor to vice president. It's a bit harder sell. Granted, she is. Yeah, he tried. And I think, honestly, I told people at the time, I think that's what was going to hurt Pete in the long run. Part of it is people were going to look and say, man, this guy's been the mayor of a small town in Indiana. Can he really make the jump from that to the nation, to being the executive of the nation, when he's just, I think that would have hurt him if he would have won the nomination and got to the general. I think the GOP really would have played on that. So again, I don't know. Like I said, I think Demings is the best choice if it was in my opinion, but there may be other things I don't know for sure.
Bodeker, who do you think? Biden's VP?
Well, I saw Tammy Duckworth getting floated a lot, but with the recent stuff going on, I don't know if he will actually pick Tammy Duckworth. If I had to bet on it, I'd probably bet on Val Demings too. If he really wanted to pick Keisha Lance Bottoms to try and make a dent in Georgia, he could try it. But I think somebody from Florida would do a lot more for Joe Biden than someone from Georgia would.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, I like Senator Duckworth also. I think she's a really good story. I mean, but she's not black, which is seeming to be the real issue for the Democratic Party right now. I also like Governor Grisham, I think, from New Mexico. She didn't really get any national attention, but she was a pretty good candidate for it, especially winning by how much approval she has in New Mexico. That would be a good choice, I personally think, but that's not.
I think Duckworth would have been a poor. Well, with her, she was in the military, I believe. So I think
she was a lieutenant colonel.
That could help with veterans and maybe more moderates around the country. But she's from Illinois. I don't think that helps Joe Biden. Illinois is a solid blue state. It has been for a while now.
Yeah, you could think about the Midwest, Ohio, Iowa, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
Influence. I don't know.
But I don't know if that would polarize African Americans, who Joe Biden is pretty popular with because of who he was vice president under. So I don't know if Tammy Duckworth would polarize that, but I do think Val Demings would probably be the best choice for him.
He could have just went with Michelle Obama. He would have won. If Michelle Obama had ran for president this cycle, she would have won.
I saw a report from Fox News the other day that there's a DNC kind of whistleblower that said Joe Biden's not even the real candidate, that they're waiting till the convention to unveil Michelle Obama as the candidate, which would be shell shock for the nation. I mean, that would be huge.
They could do that for anybody, honestly. That's not even I could see that happening very, very.
I mean, if they pick the right person, it could be brilliant, because the GOP has 3 months to prepare against someone that they haven't even seen yet.
Yeah, it could be anybody from that.
That's actually what I've said. That's what I've said in terms, to a certain extent, of the GOP. Now, they won't, because Trump has too much of an ego to step down. But if they could slip someone in and say, oh, by the way, come convention time, your candidate's going to be Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, somebody that's not near as polarizing as Donald Trump, but is a true conservative, especially one of those two that I just mentioned that's within the minority, quote unquote, minority group. Nikki Haley, somewhat being of American or Indian American. Boy, that would shock the world too. Now, like I said, is that going to happen? No, I don't really think it is by any way, shape, or form, because I don't think Trump's leaving on his own. But I mean, it's interesting when you think about that, how it could be done. I'm curious to see. I've heard the same things about the DNC. if that were to happen. It would definitely shake some things up.
Yeah. So at this kind of time when the country is so polarized, and it seems kind of like the factions that the founders worried about in the Federalist Papers are kind of winning right now, how do we go about changing that and kind of healing the nation?
It's got to be education. It's got to be through information and education, and you have to teach people how this whole thing works. And the factions that the founders talked about, they won the day sometimes at that time too. That was why they created the system that they did, so that factions couldn't truly win the day. I mean, when you look at, Federalist 10 and Madison, if you go back and read Federalist 10 right now, it's amazing how applicable it is to 2020. When you look at, he was concerned that these mob rule type of people were going to say, we want our way and we're going to do whatever we can. And he says, hey, we're going to create a system, though, within this constitutional republic that keeps those people from just all out dominating and pushing their voice onto people that may not necessarily care. I think we're polarized. I don't want to misspeak and say that we're not. I think we're probably not as polarized sometimes as we think we are. Social media is a liar a little bit in that regard. I think there was a study, like 2% of the American adult population is on Twitter. But we read Twitter and we're like, boy, it's nasty out there. But again, I think by a large majority of people wake up and they go to work and they, watch their form of news commentary. Don't misunderstand me. And they think the way that they think, but they're not at ends with their political enemy. I think we have to find a way to educate people into understanding that we can have different political views and it doesn't mean you're evil. We've gone there with our polarization, whereas if you think differently than I do politically, then you're evil and I hate you and I hate everything you stand for, and vice versa. And we've got to get the point across that that's not necessarily true. We can believe different things and still be decent human beings in the process. And at the same time, we have to change our own rhetoric in saying, hey, I believe this, and let me explain to you why, without raising my voice, without yelling, and at the end of our conversation, we may say, you know what, agree to disagree. Our belief systems come from different places, but at least we've laid it out there. At least we've developed that conversation and that dialogue and that intellectual discussion. There's got to be a whole lot more intellectual discussion, and it's awfully hard to do that in 280 characters. It's hard to do that in a Facebook status, to have intellectual discussion. It usually never happens there. I post things on Twitter or on Facebook, for the most part, people do, so that the people that already agree with them will comment, give them a hoorah and a good job. It's not because they want to engage in any type of discussion. Even if they do, that's not necessarily the forum for it.
So do you think that education is kind of the key to, because there's a lot of people attacking just the American system in general as a whole nowadays, that it's evil.
Oh, sure.
And I know in your class, we went through the Constitution, and the values of the Constitution still hold true today. There's nothing in the Constitution that's innately evil or discriminatory in any way. The values still hold true 244 years later, excuse me. But is education the key to changing that too, to people wanting to destroy the American system?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when you look at a number of different things, and of course, Bodeker, as well as anybody, how much I feel about the Electoral College. But that's a great example of that. You have people out there that just have such a misunderstanding of something as simple as the Electoral College. And I say something as simple, it chooses who the president is. And so people say, look at this thing, and they don't understand its purpose. They don't understand its reasoning. And because of that, they hate it. And they say, this is so wrong. This is so bad, because they have never been taught why we have it and whether or not it is or is not useful. And they just see something like 2016 when Hillary won the popular and she lost the Electoral College, and this is a broken system. Well, it's not a broken system. It's a system that worked exactly how it was supposed to. And there's a reason that it was created that way. And I discussed that, and I've written an article about it on my website as well, that it's gotten a lot of hits, because I try to point to the fact of what this is and what its purpose is. And that's where education is going to play a role. What is the purpose of the three branches? Why do they exist, and how do they coexist? What happens when laws are made, when vetoes are done, when you push policy? What happens when presidents usurp too much authority that they shouldn't, that they don't necessarily have the ability to? What happens? What is the purpose, if you will, of the judicial branch? Are they to interpret the law? Are they to create law? What is their job? You have to understand those things so that you have a better understanding of how the country is supposed to work. And then you can call foul when it doesn't work the way that it was intended to work based off the Constitution. Until then, you can say, well, that's not right and that's not right. But you really don't know because you don't have a clue how the system's supposed to work in the first place. So we have to get to our basic education of understanding how the system is supposed to work. And then we can call foul when it doesn't work the way that it's supposed to. And we can work to fix it as citizens.
Do you guys see after this election, both parties, both the DNC and the RNC, they're both really fragile. You can tell, just like the primary season for the Democrats was so contentious. The Republicans now, they're starting to somewhat turn against President Trump. They're turning against Senator Tillis in North Carolina, against Mitch McConnell in some places in Kentucky. Do you think that the party will either fall? Do you think one of those parties will either fall? And do you think that a party such as the Libertarian Party or the Green Party or the Reform Party, anything like that, do you think they can somewhat make this two-party system kind of change into like a multi-party system and like a not make them a major party, but a party that has representation in Congress? Obviously, Libertarians have Justin Amash from Michigan 3, but like, do you guys see a multi-party system somewhat emerging from the ashes of 2020?
I think it's altogether possible. I think it's true on both sides. If you look at the DNC, the kind of establishment moderates are holding off the left-wing progressives, and the left-wing progressives are almost winning at this point over the establishment moderates. And if you look at the RNC, the Republican Party, it's kind of the battle between the big government kind of establishment Republicans versus the really constitutional conservatives. And I think President Trump is really the only person holding the GOP together right now. I think when we go to 2024, there'll be that battle between the real constitutional small government, fiscally responsible conservatives versus the big government kind of spending money and the establishment guys. So I think there's a real possibility for a Green Party or a Libertarian Party to really make a stand in national politics.
I think the big thing is it's got to be the right candidate, especially when you look at presidential politics. It was interesting that Justin Amash, as you mentioned, he mentioned that he was going to run as a libertarian, or he was exploring a committee to look into running as the libertarian candidate for the presidency. And then he dropped it and he handed it to Joe Jorgensen, who most people have never heard of. I'm not saying that everyone has heard of Justin Amash, but he had probably a bigger naming across the nation than did Joe Jorgensen. And she's been in politics a long time, and she's, run and been a lifelong libertarian in that regard. But it's going to take the right candidate. It's going to take somebody that's well known in any third party system. I think the parties are certainly fragile. And if you had the right candidate that came along, that was a well-known candidate, I think it could make a push where they could seriously get some representation. I think it's going to be hard sometimes to get representation in Congress, unfortunately, just because of the backwards way we do things. It's going to be hard to get representation in Congress without first getting some votes in a presidential election. I'm not saying they would have to win the White House, the Libertarian Party, or the Green Party, but they would need to pull some electoral votes and then say, like, hey, this party's for real. Because no one wants to take the stab and go run, in the Illinois, 5th district as a libertarian unless they think there's some backing behind it. They got a chance to win. And so if you saw that, hey, they're winning some electoral votes in different districts, then now you're thinking, okay, I think if I ran in this party, I could do it and make it happen in Congress.
Now, do you think that trend could be accelerated if a big name from either party kind of left and started and joined one of these parties? So if Nikki Haley left the Republican Party and joined the Libertarian Party and went on the ticket, do you think that could really accelerate the trend?
Yeah, I certainly think so. Again, you've got to get someone that is likable by a certain part of the base. Now, it's going to hurt, and this is what you'd have to understand. So Nikki Haley is an example you used. If she left and went to, say, the Libertarian Party in 2024, it's probably going to hurt the GOP.
Oh, absolutely.
And it may hurt, and it's probably going to hurt her as well. If that happens, you're probably going to have a Democrat win in 2024. But at the same time, it may get the ball rolling of we can possibly have 3 viable parties or 4, depending on other, situations. And as I mentioned before, look, I'm all for it. The more competition, the better. So when you have more than 2 choices, right now you have so many people. People did it in 2016. They said, well, I picked the lesser of 2 evils or this, that, and the other. Well, if I've got 4 choices, 3 choices instead of 2, or 4 instead of 3, it's much easier to find someone that more aligns into my belief system.
Forget the Libertarian Party real quick. What do you think about the birthday party? Kanye West, do you think he'll actually have any impact on the election?
No, I want to say that he came out. Did he not come out recently and say that he was not going to run anymore?
No, it was his staff. It was somebody on his staff. He campaigned in South Carolina, I believe, the next day.
Did he?
So he is running. He's
So
not on the ballot, though, so.
I don't think he will, simply because he's on so few ballots because he waited too long to get in the race. Boy, he's an interesting guy. It's been an interesting ride for him from who he was to who he is now. But no, I don't think he has any impact at all.
Do you see, like, Kanye is obviously influential to millions of people in the United States. Do you think somebody like Kanye, like maybe like Jay-Z, someone who's been successful in the business world, maybe The Rock? I'm a big fan of The Rock running for president in 2024. I'm really into that idea. Do you think somebody like that could actually make a real run at it in 2024?
This is what I think would be difficult. I like The Rock too, actually. I'm a big fan of his. I think he does good stuff, and he's pretty apolitical, and just, he's a likable guy by everybody, which is nice. I think what would make it hard would be your older voters, who are your more reliable voters. I think are going to look at that guy and say, I don't know. I don't think he's really experienced enough to do anything. Now, granted, people could make the same argument about Trump, but at least Trump had the business background and he had the economic background where people could put a little bit of trust in there. Well, with The Rock and your younger voting bloc is not consistent enough to make a big sway.
I feel like the misconception about The Rock is he actually is like a really successful businessman. He does run a couple of businesses, but like I think if he can get that into people's minds, I think he could run as an independent. I think he could win, honestly. He could do George Washington, the first second independent candidate to win.
That would be the kicker, is him getting that in people's minds, because I think the majority of people, it was funny you bring The Rock up. I was actually talking to my dad about this the other day, and he was saying, I'm not a big fan of The Rock. He was like, I just can't get past the professional wrestling thing, And so for the older generation, that is your more reliable voter, he would have to really put that out there, like, hey, I'm more than just a professional wrestler or an actor, And I think that would be harder to do. It's not impossible, but it would be harder to do.
Okay, but the advertisement of him wrestling whoever the other candidate with their face on it, that's an iconic ad. That would be epic.
That I would agree with. Yeah, that would be a good one.
Him body slamming like Nikki Haley onto the mat. That's the greatest advertisement in the history of political advertising.
I don't know if he body slams Nikki Haley. That may actually.
I love Nikki Haley, but that would just be hilarious.
In our current climate, if he body slams a female candidate, it's probably not going to end very well for him. Actually,
whoever it is, that'd be hilarious.
I would love to see that.
Maybe I'm too optimistic on The Rock's candidacy.
I am very optimistic on The Rock's candidacy as well. So I do want to see that happen. Of course, if that doesn't happen, maybe a more moderate Andrew Yang in 2024 for the Democrats would win it for them. Because Biden's not going to run again.
Andrew Yang's an interesting character too, just simply because he came out of nowhere a little bit, but the whole, he's got to make his stuff more sellable. The UBI is not a extremely foreign concept, and you have a lot of people that I think could actually get behind that if it's explained properly. And again, this goes back to education. He's got to do a better job of just saying, hey, I'm going to give you $1,000 a month, because people hear that and they're like, whoa. And it sounds exactly like another entitlement program, which people on the right are against, but it's really not when you dive into it further. And he needs to do a better job of explaining his policies. Now, granted, it would help if he would get a little bit more airtime, but nonetheless.
You don't want to talk for 3 minutes in a debate?
Yeah, it's hard to
like 2
get your
minutes,
point
7
out there.
seconds. I'm a big fan of his. So I have a bumper sticker on my car of Yang 2020 actually. So
I have one in my room that Eshan gave me. Yeah.
So you're in the Yang gang. That's what you're talking about.
I was, yeah, and then he dropped out. But now that the stimulus checks have been going out, only one of them have gone out. Another round's coming, but he was trying to push. He was working with the Trump administration to get those going. So right. I feel like things like that, if they had made it, I think that's like a good step for him, kind of. Like, remember those stimulus checks from like 4 years ago? Yeah, I helped getting those out. So that's what it could be like every month. And you're like, I feel
Well,
like
I think he's fairly young too, isn't he? He's in
he is
what
45,
his 40s.
Yeah, he's pretty young.
The key with that is if he could really push it to where, if he could really make the point, because man, you could seriously win, because you have a lot of people on the right that are really concerned with the amount of entitlements that are out there and the entitlement spending just within the United States budget. And if you could say, hey, this UBI is going to not be a new entitlement, it's going to replace entitlement spending. I think people are, if you could really explain it well, you could really win a lot of fiscal conservatives. It just has to be explained well.
Yeah, and you also, I think you also have to drum into people's minds that it creates, like, it'll help the economy. It won't just be like, it won't be Social Security, just going to bankrupt us. We need to kind of fix that.
Well, and it goes to the idea too. It helps fix Social Security, because what it's ultimately doing is it's allowing me to get my Social Security now. It's pulling from the Social Security that I may or may not ever get to touch. Yeah. And I'm a big fan that we have to find ways right now politically to let people get to their Social Security. The GOP created a few months back now, maybe it was a year or so ago, they were looking at a paid family leave plan, and they were doing it in a way that it didn't create a new entitlement, but rather it allowed a mother, if you will, to pull from her Social Security early and use that. I think that's a great plan, because they don't have to take any of the days that they currently have to take, and they may or may not ever see their Social Security anyway. So let's let them spend it while they're living, while they get something out of it. So if they can find ways to frame it that way, I think it could be beneficial.
I maybe run as an independent. I don't know. I feel like the Democratic Party is just not ready for anything radical. That's why, Tulsi Gabbard could be an incredible vice president for Biden if she was, because she attracted a lot of Trump voters in her polling.
She did.
She won a contest, actually. She won like American Samoa. So
yeah, she did, I think.
that's the stepping stone to 2024 Wayne Gabbard. On it right now. That's the dream candidacy for many. What's it called? Disenfranchised voters.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing too. You're starting to feel, more and more people are starting to feel a little disenfranchised and a little unrepresented by their two major parties. And that's what it's going to take. It's going to take some people that says, hey, I don't want to represent you. I don't want to represent the GOP or the Democratic Party. I want to represent you. And they're going to have to look at some data and see where most of the American people are and form a philosophy around that. And I think they could get somewhere with it.
Yeah, and I think you're right. You were right, Steve. The kind of the polarization in America is kind of overwrought. Because I think there have been times that we've been extremely polarized, but people just forgot about it. 2000 election was very polarized. 1876, very polarizing election. I think 1960 was a very hotly contested election.
Certainly.
Even 1968, very hotly contested election. 1800, as you mentioned, 1824. We've had a lot of contested elections. We just think that each one, as we're more polarized, that this is the big one. Because remember, 2016 was the election to define all elections in the history of the United States.
Sure.
Yeah, and oh my God, if Hillary wins, it's the end of the world. If Trump wins, it's the end of the world. That's how polarized we were. And now here we are in 2020. Oh my God, if Biden wins, it's the end of the world. Oh my God, if Trump wins, it's the end of the world. It's the same thing. We only notice because we're polarized right now.
2020 has been the end of the world like 6 times already. So
I've made the joke with my students often. We're survivors. We survived net neutrality. We survived tax cuts. We survived all these things that were going to be the death of us all. The apocalypse was now Kavanaugh's confirmation. Somehow we're still living. And so often we do that type of stuff. We're like, hey, if Biden wins or if Trump wins or whatever, the world as we know it will forever be changed. And you have both parties that put campaigns out like that as a fear tactic to, try to make you vote their way. And it's just simply not true.
Well, and you're exactly right, though, that the presidential elections, the president, the executive branch, they only enforce the laws. They don't make any of the actual legislation. It's more up to the House and Senate that really matter. It's all well and good having Joe Biden or Donald Trump in the White House as long as if Joe Biden wins and he's got a Republican House and Senate, what's he going to do?
Right.
If Donald Trump wins and he has a Democratic House and Senate, what is Donald Trump going to do to advance his agenda? He can't, because he doesn't have the lawmaking ability to do it. And that's the problem with the legislative branch delegating their power, is that they're kind of giving these presidents who are not from their party more power to kind of do things that they wouldn't normally be able to do.
Yeah, without question. And I think that happened a while back. And the reason the legislative branch does this, unfortunately, is because they're here to get reelected, which perhaps term limits in the legislative branch would help solve that problem. I don't know. But, if I don't make any serious decisions, and if I'm not forced to vote on certain controversial bills, then I won't make anyone unhappy and I can keep getting reelected. And that's the problem. So let's just delegate to the judicial branch, for example. Let's let them determine the policy instead of we'll make the policy and they'll do their job of interpreting it. No, let's let them make the policy. Therefore, you can't get mad at me and I can just keep winning reelection. And that's the problem that the legislative branch, currently just the cycle that it rides in.
Yeah, I think term limits are a modern solution for what's happening. I mean, everywhere. I think the Supreme Court should have term limits because, Justice Ginsburg is like half dead right now, and she's just on for the partisan.
She's absolutely holding out for a Joe Biden victory in 2020. She will retire the day after the election if Joe Biden wins.
It'll have to be after he gets inaugurated when Trump wins.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, that's the problem. I don't necessarily want to say term limits on the judicial branch. I would say that maybe we put an age maximum on it, put it at, 80, 85. I mean, even 85, I could live with that depending on the health. But that's the problem, is you have people that hold on for the partisanship of it, rather than
85 right now, right? So.
Yeah. And now granted, I don't foresee him running for re-election in 2022. So we'll see how that goes. But
I don't see how he never ran for president, honestly. He's the most senior senator, right, in the Republican Party.
Chuck Grassley? Is Chuck Grassley the most senior?
Chuck Grassley's technically the president pro tem. He's more senior than Shelby is.
And then it used to be Orrin Hatch? Is that who it was?
Orrin Hatch from Utah was before that. Yeah, that was my guy, Orrin Hatch. He was hilarious.
Chuck Grassley's the one you're not sure can read, right?
I'm not 100% sure.
Iowa's not looking too good for Trump this year somehow. I guess Obama did win Iowa. So I guess
it's not looking great for Joni Ernst either.
Yeah, Teresa Greenfield. She might flip it back to. I mean, if Biden wins, I feel like Greenfield can win. So
of course. If Biden wins, that could spell victory in Maine and North Carolina for Democratic Senate candidates. Yep. I mean, even Arizona, Colorado, even one in Georgia.
Yeah, I think it's in my our newest forecast. I released it this morning. Biden actually, seriously, if Biden can make Texas even I label Texas a swing state now. I feel like it's deserved for them, but Biden has the opportunity to win the election before the West Coast polls close. If he can win Texas, he has an actual possibility at it, which is kind of crazy.
Oh, I think so. I mean, Alan West wrote a book a few years ago about pretty much, as goes Texas, as goes America, pretty much saying that the candidate that's going to win Texas wins the election, And so I think that's definitely very possible.
Well, and Ted Cruz came out and said that if the Democrats take Texas, it's over for the GOP nationwide.
Yeah.
And I think there's a large grain of truth to that.
Yeah, I mean,
I think so too.
The 4 biggest electoral prizes could go all Democratic this year, which hasn't happened a long time, I'd say. I was playing with it. Yeah, if Biden can win the whole West or East Coast without Maine one, I believe that's the one where Trump is favored to win in. The Midwest, as in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, and Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Nebraska too, which is like Omaha and Lincoln, I think, and Texas. He can win the general before polls close in Utah, Nevada, Colorado, which would be I guess Reagan did that, right? Reagan only lost one state.
He did.
else doing that.
He won everything except for DC and Minnesota, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And Minnesota is Walter Mondale's home state, and DC is just DC.
Yeah. DC statehood on the rise. Forgot about that.
DC statehood, or the retrocession into Maryland or Virginia, because that's the Republican solution to DC statehood. Is retrocede.
Not do either. They should make Puerto Rico a state, though. I feel like Puerto Rico is deserving of being a state because they can't protect themselves from stuff. They do hide their aid sometimes, but it's easy to see. I am out of questions.
I've been out of questions for 10 minutes now. We're off the cuff.
So, thank you for doing this.
Absolutely.
You write books, correct? Tell the audience.
I do, yeah. I've written 5 separate books. One of them is about politics. The most recent one's about politics. They're all kind of based around religion, which is kind of my crux of my entire belief system. And so this most recent one is about politics. It's called The Political Conscience of the Christian, in which it kind of talks about how the Christian belief system and politics, they come to the beliefs that they do. Talks about a couple of different policies. It's short. It's not very long. It's quick, easy read. I try to make it, thorough yet concise, so that the everyday reader could follow along with it and get what they need to do out of it. And it would just kind of be a starting point for someone to look possibly further into certain things. I write too for gospelpatriot.com, which is a website my brother and I created. So I have articles over there in which I expound on some things from the book, I guess, to take it a little bit further if you wanted to read more. Talk about some current events, talk about a number of other different things. So, yeah, absolutely.
And you write for us now, too.
And every now and then I throw something interesting TV political. So that's been great, yeah.
Yeah, we appreciate it. You have I think you hold the record for the most single-day article views.
There we go. That's what I like to hear.
Yeah,
thanks.
We'll link the books and the website down below in the comments section or the read more section of the YouTube description. I don't know what it's called.
Appreciate that.
And thank you for watching. Share with your friends, and we'll see you guys next week.
Like and